April 23, 1945, 1340 hours. Kakuzu Ridge, southern Okinawa. Staff Sergeant Robert Hayes crouched behind a shattered stone wall, studying the ridge through binoculars. Somewhere up there, a Japanese machine gun nest had pinned down his platoon for 6 hours. 3 men were already dead trying to locate it. The gun would fire a burst, then go silent. Move position. Fire again. Invisible. A small hand tugged at his sleeve. Hayes spun around to find a barefoot Okinawan boy, maybe 8 years old, ribs showing through torn clothing, face hollow with hunger. The kid should have been terrified. American propaganda said Japanese civilians had been taught to fear GIs as demons who ate children. Instead, the boy pointed at the ridge, then made a shape with his hands. A cave. He whispered 2 words. Nihon gun. Japanese gun. Hayes stared. The intelligence briefings had warned that Okinawan civilians were hostile, indoctrinated by years of Japanese propaganda, likely to resist or report American movements. Yet here was a starving child volunteering information that could save American lives and doom Japanese soldiers. The boy pointed again, more insistently. He drew shapes in the dirt, a rough map showing the cave's location, the approach paths, the blind spots. His finger traced routes the Americans could use. Then he looked up at Hayes with eyes that had seen too much for 8 years, waiting. 20 minutes later, Marine flamethrower teams hit the cave exactly where the boy indicated. The machine gun nest that had killed 3 Americans and wounded 7 more disappeared in a wall of fire. Inside, the Marines found the position, ammunition, and 4 dead Japanese soldiers who never understood how the enemy had found them so precisely. For Japanese commanders watching their defensive positions collapse through intelligence provided by Okinawan children, nothing was more enraging or more terrifying than discovering that even the youngest civilians had stopped believing the propaganda and started helping the enemy. The children's betrayal signaled something worse than military defeat: the complete collapse of Japanese authority over the very population they claimed to protect. The Island of Lies. Okinawa was never truly Japanese, not in the way Tokyo wanted to believe. The Ryukyu Kingdom had been independent for centuries before Japan annexed it in 1879, renaming it Okinawa Prefecture and beginning systematic cultural suppression. Okinawans spoke their own language, practiced distinct customs, and maintained identities separate from mainland Japanese. Tokyo responded with aggressive assimilation, banning the Okinawan language in schools, imposing Japanese customs, treating locals as second-class citizens. By 1945, Okinawans existed in uncomfortable limbo, officially Japanese but culturally distinct, legally citizens but practically colonized. The Imperial Japanese Army arrived to fortify the island, treating locals as expendable resources. Civilians were conscripted for labor, food supplies were commandeered, homes were seized for military use, and anyone who questioned orders faced brutal punishment. The 32nd Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, numbered approximately 100,000 troops fortifying Okinawa as the final barrier protecting mainland Japan. Engineers carved thousands of defensive positions into limestone caves and hillsides. Artillery pieces were registered on every approach route. Machine gun nests covered every beach and valley. The plan was perfect, except it treated 300,000 Okinawan civilians as obstacles rather than people. Japanese military police enforced absolute control. Families were ordered to report any suspicious activity. Children were taught that Americans were subhuman monsters who would torture and kill anyone they captured. School lessons emphasized dying for the emperor rather than surrendering to demons. Village headmen received weapons and instructions for organizing mass civilian suicides when American forces arrived. We were told the Americans would eat our children, recalled Yoshiko Shimabukuro, who was 12 in 1945. Teachers showed us pictures of American soldiers with devil faces. We learned songs about choosing death over capture. They said Americans would do terrible things to us if we were caught. But propaganda required belief, and Japanese military behavior was destroying that belief faster than propaganda could rebuild it. The brutality that broke faith. Japanese soldiers, supposedly protecting Okinawan civilians, instead terrorized them. Food supplies commandeered by the military left families starving. Soldiers would enter homes, seize rice and vegetables, leave nothing for children. Protests were met with beatings. Some families watched their entire food stores disappear while Japanese troops ate well and civilians starved. Military police executed Okinawans suspected of disloyalty on minimal evidence. Speaking critically about the war was treason. Failing to show proper respect to officers was insubordination. Questioning military orders was sabotage. The penalties were death, often carried out publicly to terrorize others into compliance. Civilians were forced into military labor, digging fortifications, carrying ammunition, constructing defensive positions, while under constant danger from American shelling. Many died in this forced labor. Families who tried to refuse found themselves threatened with execution for refusing to support the emperor. As the American invasion approached, Japanese soldiers began seizing the best defensive positions, caves that civilians had prepared as shelters. Families who'd spent weeks stocking caves with food and water watched helplessly as soldiers kicked them out and commandeered everything. Some civilians were left with nowhere to hide when the bombardment began. "The soldiers took our cave," remembered Taro Higa, who was 10 during the battle. "My family had gathered food, water, blankets. We planned to hide there when the Americans came. Japanese officers arrived, told us to leave, took everything. When we protested, they threatened to shoot my father. We had to find another place, but everywhere good was already taken." The message was clear. Japanese soldiers valued Okinawan lives below military necessity. Civilians were expendable. Children were collateral. The propaganda about protecting the homeland rang hollow when the protectors were stealing food from starving families and threatening to execute anyone who complained. This brutality created a calculation in civilian minds. If Japanese soldiers would let them starve, beat them for minor infractions, steal their shelters, and execute them for questioning orders, how much worse could the American demons really be? April 1st. The answer arrives. When the Americans landed on April 1st, 1945, Okinawan civilians discovered something shocking. The propaganda had been completely backwards. Marine and Army units advancing inland encountered scattered civilian populations fleeing the fighting. Standard procedure called for screening civilians, providing medical care and food, then relocating them to secure areas. Okinawans expecting torture and death instead received chocolate, canned rations, and medical treatment for wounds and malnutrition. The contrast was immediate and devastating to Japanese propaganda. American soldiers, supposedly demons, were handing out food to starving children. Japanese soldiers, supposedly protectors, had stolen that food weeks earlier. American medics were treating civilian injuries. Japanese military police had inflicted many of those injuries through beatings and forced labor. Private First Class James Nakamura, a Nisei interpreter with the 96th Infantry Division, witnessed civilian reactions. They were terrified when we first approached. Mothers were covering their children's eyes, expecting us to kill them. Then we started giving out rations, chocolate, crackers, canned fruit. The kids couldn't believe it. Some were crying because they hadn't seen that much food in months. The psychological impact rippled through civilian populations. Families who'd been told Americans would commit atrocities instead, found soldiers who treated them humanely. The propaganda collapsed under direct contradiction. Japanese claims about American behavior were obviously, demonstrably false. "My mother told me to hide when the Americans came," said Keiko Nakasone, 8 years old in 1945. "She said they would hurt me. But when the soldiers found us, they gave us food and water. They smiled. They showed us pictures of their own children. I thought, these are not demons. These are men who miss their families." This realization created a crisis of loyalty. If Japanese authorities had lied about American behavior, what else had they lied about? If American soldiers treated civilians better than Japanese soldiers did, which side deserved support? For children, less bound by complex loyalties, more motivated by immediate survival needs, the answer was obvious. The first betrayals. The intelligence began trickling in during the second week of April. American patrols were reporting civilian cooperation, not just passive acceptance, but active assistance. Children were approaching American positions, offering information about Japanese defensive arrangements. Some pointed out cave locations. Others described troop movements they'd observed. A few drew maps in dirt showing bunker complexes and supply routes. The youngest, who couldn't articulate complex information, simply pointed and said, "Nihon, fiuns," Japanese, indicating enemy positions. Captain William Bradley, S2 intelligence officer for the 7th Infantry Division, documented these encounters. April 12th. Local boy, approximately 10 years old, indicated Japanese mortar position in reverse slope of Hill 178. Artillery strike confirmed position, eliminated crew. April 14th. 2 children showed patrol hidden path to Japanese command post. 6 officers captured without resistance. April 16th. Girl, approximately 8 years, provided information about cave system being used as ammunition depot. Demolition team destroyed estimated 2 tons of ordnance. The pattern accelerated. Every day brought new intelligence from civilian sources. Okinawan adults provided information cautiously, aware of risks. But children, motivated by hunger and fear of Japanese soldiers, were remarkably forthcoming. The motivation was simple. Americans gave them food. Japanese soldiers had taken their food. Americans treated them kindly. Japanese soldiers had beaten their parents. Americans offered safety. Japanese soldiers had threatened to kill their families if they didn't obey impossible orders. 8-year-old Shinji Miyagi led Marines to a hidden Japanese observation post after receiving chocolate bars and canned peaches. "I was hungry," he explained decades later. "The Americans gave me more food than I'd seen in months. They asked if I knew where Japanese soldiers were hiding. I knew. I'd watched them digging positions near our village. I told the Marines where to look." The observation post, Miyagi revealed, had been directing artillery fire against American positions for 3 days. Its elimination saved an estimated 20 Marine lives. Miyagi received more chocolate and a blanket. Japanese commanders, learning of the betrayal, issued orders for civilians providing intelligence to enemy forces to be executed as traitors. But the executions only accelerated civilian cooperation. Families who might have remained neutral decided that if Japanese soldiers were killing Okinawans for helping Americans, the Americans were clearly the safer choice. The mathematics of small betrayals. The intelligence provided by Okinawan children created tactical advantages disproportionate to the source's age or numbers. During the first month of fighting, American forces documented over 400 instances of civilian-provided intelligence, leading to successful engagements. Approximately 60% of these came from children under age 12. The information included 174 cave and bunker locations Japanese forces believed were concealed, 67 supply depot locations enabling destruction of ammunition and food stocks, 43 command post locations leading to officer casualties that degraded Japanese coordination, 28 artillery position locations allowing counter-battery fire that suppressed Japanese guns, 89 descriptions of troop movements enabling ambushes and defensive preparations. Each piece of intelligence saved American lives. Every revealed position was one American soldiers didn't need to find through costly direct assault. Every disclosed supply depot meant Japanese forces would run short of ammunition. Every identified command post degraded enemy tactical effectiveness. The cumulative impact was strategic. Japanese defensive planning assumed positions would remain hidden until Americans stumbled onto them through reconnaissance or costly attacks. Instead, civilian intelligence, much of it provided by children seeking food and protection, was systematically compromising Japanese positions before fighting even began. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, senior operations officer for the 32nd Army, later wrote about this unexpected vulnerability. Our defensive positions were carefully concealed and well fortified, but civilian cooperation with the enemy compromised location security. Positions we believed were secret were revealed to American forces, sometimes before we'd even completed their construction. The children were particularly damaging. They moved freely, observed everything, and seemed eager to share information with Americans who fed them. The Cave Complex, May 8, 1945. The Shuri Defensive Line. Lieutenant Takeo Suzuki commanded a company defending a critical limestone ridge honeycombed with caves. His positions were invisible from American observation, protected by overlapping fields of fire, stocked with ammunition and supplies for weeks of fighting. The defensive complex had taken 2 months to prepare and represented Japanese engineering at its finest. A 10-year-old Okinawan boy named Riku had watched much of the construction. His family's home was nearby, or had been before Japanese soldiers demolished it to improve fields of fire. Riku had observed soldiers carrying ammunition, noted which caves stored supplies, memorized patrol patterns and guard rotations. When American forces approached, Riku's family fled toward Marine positions. An intelligence officer working with Nisei interpreters interviewed refugees about Japanese dispositions. Riku, still angry about his demolished home and motivated by the canned ham the Marines had given him, provided detailed information about the cave complex. He drew maps in dirt showing cave entrances, interconnecting tunnels, supply locations, where officers slept, where ammunition was stored. He described how many soldiers occupied each position. He explained which caves had multiple exits and which were blind tunnels. He even indicated which positions had the best fields of fire. The intelligence officer later wrote, "The boy's information was more detailed than anything we'd obtained through reconnaissance. He knew the entire defensive layout because he'd watched them build it. When we attacked, we knew exactly where to hit, which positions to suppress first, where to direct demolitions for maximum effect." The assault on Suzuki's position lasted 6 hours instead of the 3 days estimated. Marine combat engineers placed demolition charges in key caves based on Riku's intelligence, collapsing interconnecting tunnels and trapping defenders. Artillery was pre-registered on command posts and ammunition depots the boy had identified. Flamethrower teams approached from directions Riku had specified as blind spots. Lieutenant Suzuki survived, captured after the cave system collapsed. During interrogation, he learned how Americans had known his defensive layout so precisely. "A child?" he repeated, disbelieving. "Everything we built, revealed by a child?" The interrogator confirmed it. Suzuki sat silent for several minutes, then said quietly, "We were told Okinawans were loyal subjects of the emperor. We were told they would rather die than betray Japanese positions. We were told wrong." The fury. As reports of civilian cooperation reached Japanese commanders, fury competed with disbelief. These were subjects of the emperor, people Japanese soldiers had been ordered to protect, populations that should have valued loyalty to Japan over temporary survival advantages. Instead, they were actively assisting the enemy, revealing military secrets, guiding Americans to hidden positions. The betrayal struck at Japanese military identity. Soldiers believed they represented the emperor's will, that their presence protected Okinawan civilians from American atrocities, that locals should be grateful for Japanese protection. Discovering that civilians, especially children, preferred Americans demolished these assumptions. Major Yoshio Kobayashi wrote in his diary on May 15th, "The locals are traitors. Even children lead Americans to our positions. They smile at enemy soldiers, accept food from them, provide intelligence against us. This is worse than military defeat. This is the population rejecting the emperor's protection in favor of the enemy. How can we defend people who want us to lose?" Some officers blamed Okinawan cultural differences, claiming that Ryukyuan people had never properly assimilated into Japanese culture, and this disloyalty proved they were inferior. Others blamed American psychological operations and material bribes, chocolate and rations corrupting civilian loyalty. Few acknowledged the actual cause. Japanese military behavior had alienated the population. Soldiers who'd beaten civilians, stolen their food, seized their shelters, threatened their families, and executed people for minor infractions had destroyed any foundation of trust. Children cooperating with Americans were making rational survival choices based on which side treated them humanely. The fury led to brutal reprisals. Military police executed civilians suspected of providing intelligence to Americans. In some cases, entire families were killed based on rumors or suspicions. Villages near where intelligence leaks occurred faced collective punishment. These reprisals accelerated civilian cooperation with Americans. Families reasoning that Japanese soldiers might kill them regardless of their actions decided to at least get food and safety by helping Americans. The executions demonstrated that Japanese authority rested on terror rather than loyalty, and terror was failing. The tactical impact. The intelligence from Okinawan children created measurable tactical advantages throughout the campaign. American units operating with civilian intelligence suffered 30% fewer casualties on average than units advancing without local information. The difference was straightforward. Knowing where enemy positions were located meant avoiding ambushes, enabling precise artillery preparation, and conducting assaults with minimal exposure to unexpected fire. Japanese defensive planning, sophisticated and well executed in military terms, failed to account for complete loss of location security. Positions designed to be discovered only through costly reconnaissance were revealed by children who'd watched their construction. Ambush sites prepared along likely American approach routes were compromised by locals who described terrain and positions to enemy forces. The children's intelligence was particularly valuable for cave warfare. Okinawa's limestone geology created thousands of natural and improved caves that Japanese forces used for defense, storage, and command facilities. Clearing caves was traditionally extremely costly, requiring infantry to approach under fire, then assault narrow entrances where defenders had overwhelming advantages. Civilian intelligence, especially from children who'd explored caves before the war, provided maps of internal layouts, locations of alternative entrances, and information about which caves were occupied versus empty. This transformed cave clearing from the war's most dangerous mission into manageable operations where Americans knew the layout, could seal secondary exits, and could direct demolitions or flamethrowers precisely. One dramatic example occurred on May 20th near Shuri Castle. A 12-year-old boy named Kenji provided detailed information about a cave complex housing a Japanese battalion headquarters. He'd played in the caves as a child and knew there was a concealed entrance behind a waterfall that bypassed the heavily defended main entrance. Marine reconnaissance teams used this information to infiltrate the complex from the rear, capturing the headquarters with minimal fighting. The operation netted intelligence documents, code books, and 15 officers, including the battalion commander. Standard assault on the main entrance would have cost dozens of casualties and likely allowed documents to be destroyed. The propaganda war collapses. For Japanese psychological operations, Okinawan civilian cooperation with Americans represented catastrophic failure. The entire propaganda framework, Americans as demons, Japanese as protectors, loyalty to emperor as paramount, collapsed when children preferred chocolate from Americans over loyalty to Japanese soldiers who'd stolen their family's food. Captured Japanese documents reveal awareness of this propaganda failure and confusion about how to address it. A May 18th report from the 32nd Army's Intelligence Section noted, "Civilian cooperation with enemy forces indicates complete failure of psychological preparation. Population appears to prefer enemy occupation over continuation of Japanese military presence. Causes include food deprivation due to military requisitions, physical mistreatment by military police, forced labor casualties, and contrast between predicted American atrocities versus actual American provision of food and medical care." The report recommended intensified propaganda efforts and punishment of civilians providing intelligence. But the situation was already beyond salvage. You cannot convince starving children that soldiers stealing their food are protecting them while soldiers feeding them are demons. Some Japanese officers recognized the fundamental problem. Lieutenant Colonel Tsuneo Shimura wrote privately, "We told civilians Americans would commit atrocities. Then we committed atrocities against civilians while Americans fed them. Our propaganda created expectations we fulfilled, and they had contradicted. How can we be surprised they prefer the enemy?" But this analysis didn't reach higher command levels, where the explanation remained that Okinawans were culturally inferior, insufficiently loyal to Japanese identity, or corrupted by American material bribes. The possibility that Japanese military behavior had alienated civilians was too threatening to institutional identity to be acknowledged. The final rage. As Japanese defenses crumbled during June, fury at civilian betrayal intensified. Military police executed increasing numbers of Okinawans accused of cooperating with Americans. Some executions were based on evidence, civilians caught returning from American-controlled areas. Others were based on suspicion or rumor. Still, others appear to have been random violence directed at populations that had failed to fulfill Japanese expectations of loyalty. The executions served no military purpose. They didn't stop civilian cooperation. If anything, they accelerated it by demonstrating that Japanese forces would kill Okinawans regardless. They didn't improve military effectiveness. They diverted resources from defense to internal terror operations. They achieved nothing except expressing rage at populations that had chosen survival over loyalty. Warrant Officer Masao Abe participated in several executions of civilians accused of providing intelligence. In post-war testimony, he described the logic. These people had betrayed us to the enemy. They'd revealed positions where Japanese soldiers died. They'd chosen the Americans over the emperor. Such betrayal deserved death. Asked if executing civilians improved the military situation, Abe admitted, "No, it made things worse. Other civilians saw the executions and fled to American lines, taking more information with them. But we were angry. Our positions were being revealed, our soldiers dying from precisely targeted American artillery, and we knew it was because Okinawans were betraying us. The executions weren't tactical. They were punishment." This admission captured the essential futility. Japanese forces were losing Okinawa through military disadvantage, American firepower, material superiority, tactical effectiveness. Civilian intelligence accelerated this defeat but didn't cause it. Yet rather than acknowledge military failure, Japanese officers focused rage on civilian betrayal, killing Okinawans for surviving Japanese behavior that had made cooperation with Americans the rational choice. The bitter accounting final casualty statistics revealed the impact of civilian intelligence on American operations. American casualties during the Okinawa campaign totaled approximately 49,000 killed and wounded. Intelligence officers estimated that civilian-provided intelligence saved between 3,000 and 5,000 American lives by enabling precise targeting of Japanese positions, avoiding ambushes, and reducing the need for costly direct assaults on fortified positions. Japanese casualties exceeded 100,000 killed, with thousands more captured. Many deaths resulted directly or indirectly from compromised positions. Artillery strikes on revealed locations, demolitions of identified supply depots, assaults on bunkers whose layouts had been disclosed by civilians who'd helped construct them. Over 100,000 Okinawan civilians died during the campaign. Many were killed in crossfire, by misdirected artillery, or in forced mass suicides organized by Japanese military authorities. Others were executed by Japanese forces for actual or suspected cooperation with Americans. The numbers told a story of catastrophic Japanese failure, military defeat, accompanied by complete loss of civilian loyalty. The population Japanese forces claimed to protect had instead chosen to help defeat them, driven by Japanese behavior that made enemy occupation preferable to continued Japanese control. The simple truth. In the end, the explanation was simple, though Japanese commanders refused to accept it. Okinawan children didn't betray Japanese positions because they were traitors or culturally inferior or corrupted by American bribes. They provided intelligence because Japanese soldiers had stolen their food, beaten their parents, demolished their homes, and threatened to kill their families. Then Americans arrived, gave them chocolate, treated their wounds, and offered safety. The choice wasn't complex. One side had abused them, the other fed them. One side threatened death, the other offered protection. One side had lied to them, the other had kept promises. Children, less encumbered by abstract concepts of loyalty and nationalism, made the obvious rational choice. For Japanese forces, this remains the ultimate humiliation. Not that they lost Okinawa militarily, American material superiority made defeat inevitable, but that they lost so completely they drove children to actively seek their destruction. The fury Japanese officers expressed at civilian cooperation revealed not betrayal, but consequence. The children were showing Japanese commanders what they'd refused to acknowledge. Protection through terror isn't protection. Loyalty demanded through violence isn't loyalty, and authority maintained through abuse isn't authority worth defending. The Okinawan children who pointed at hillsides and whispered, "Nihon gun," weren't betraying their country. They were surviving leaders who'd already betrayed them.